The sheriff dropped an eviction notice on my porch like it was trash. I didn't argue. Didn't blink. Just slid a brittle piece of paper across the table. A 1923 water rights deed signed in my great-grandfather's hand. That single document turned their shiny new subdivision into future lakefront property. They thought they were taking my family's farm. They were actually sitting on a dam they didn't even know existed. When you serve with the Army Corps of Engineers, you learn one truth. You can't fight gravity. And that day, gravity was on my side. You're watching Tomato Tales. Hit that subscribe button, because this story's about to wash away everything they thought they owned. My name's Jake Morrison, 34 third-generation Texan, and reluctant heir to 47 acres of stubborn earth just outside Austin. My grandfather, everyone called him Pops, bought that patch of land in 1955, when brisket smoke hung thicker than traffic and handshakes still meant something. Pops wasn't a man of speeches. He was a man of work boots and fences built straight. In '78, he shaped a small earthen dam by hand, a quiet curve of clay and gravel that caught rain for cattle and kept the creek alive through every drought. The Army Corps helped him design it. Nothing fancy, just solid engineering and a promise that the land would always feed more than one family. Then, life happened. While I was deployed overseas fixing water systems in deserts, Pops passed away. My sister Sarah, bless her California heart, took over the trust. She thought land management meant paying taxes online. That's how the sharks started circling. Enter Margaret Maggie Thornwell, president of Willowbrook Estates HOA, power-hungry smile, councilman husband. She smelled opportunity the way a coyote smells blood. While I was halfway around the world, she and her developer friends red-taped their way onto my soil. When I came home, I expected quiet pastures. Instead, I found survey stakes, cement trucks, and a sign that read Willowbrook, Estates Phase 2. Luxury living coming soon. The crunch of gravel under my boots didn't sound like home anymore. It sounded like betrayal. That's when I realized this wasn't just about property lines. This was about legacy. And they had no idea that under their perfect cul-de-sacs sat 45 years of federal engineering, waiting to teach them a lesson in humility. They thought they owned the land. Next, they'll learn who controls the water. Stick around and make sure you're subscribed to Tomato Tales, because gravity's got a score to settle. I followed the sound of engines before I even saw the trucks. Diesel smoke drifted over the ridge like a warning. When I crested the hill, I saw them. Construction crews digging trenches across my pasture. Men in neon vests tearing through soil that had been in my family for 3 generations. The foreman barely looked up when I walked over. "Sorry, buddy," he said, not sounding sorry at all. "We got permits. This is Willowbrook Estates property now." That's when the taste of dust turned bitter in my mouth. Permits for my land? I called the county. They told me the same thing the foreman did. The HOA had filed an adverse possession claim while I was overseas. Apparently, if land looks unused for a while, and someone claims they're improving it, they can try to take ownership. It's an old Texas law meant to stop land from rotting, not to help thieves steal from soldiers. That's when she appeared, Maggie Thornwell, queen of the HOA, rolling up in a white BMW golf cart like suburban royalty. She had that sugar-coated voice that hides poison underneath. "Your family abandoned this land, honey," she said, smiling through her sunglasses. "We're just putting it to better use for the community." The community. That word hit like a slap. The only community I'd ever known was Pops, our neighbors, and that dam that kept their wells alive. But the real punch came when I checked the creek. The water feeding Pops's dam had been diverted. A new trench cut right through my property line, drying the reservoir that had stood for 45 years. Each day the water line fell another inch. I could almost hear Pops's voice in my head. "Water's worth more than gold in Texas, son, and twice as easy to steal." I tried hiring an attorney. The first one quoted me 85 grand just to challenge the zoning change. He didn't even look me in the eye when he told me that Maggie's husband, Councilman Rick Thornwell, had influenced the emergency rezoning. That's when I stopped looking for lawyers and started looking for loopholes. I spent nights in the county archives combing through dust and forgotten records. That's where I found it. Pops's original 1978 dam permit signed by the Army Corps of Engineers. Federal jurisdiction. The kind no HOA, no city council, and no Maggie Thornwell could ever override. And that's when it hit me. This wasn't just a fight over land. It was about to become a federal case. They had money, lawyers, and City Hall on speed dial, but I had something stronger. Federal flood control law and a damn good memory. Don't forget to subscribe to Tomato Tales because this storm's just getting started. The courthouse smelled like mildew and broken promises. Every drawer I opened coughed up a decade of dust, but I kept going, page after page, looking for anything Pops might have left behind. Most folks see old paper. I see blueprints for revenge. That's when I found it. Tucked between yellowed tax receipts and forgotten land surveys. Pop's 1978 dam construction permit. Signed by the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. The seal was faded, but it still shined like armor. That piece of paper changed everything, because once the Army Corps touches a structure, it falls under federal jurisdiction. And that meant no HOA, no zoning board. No smug councilman could override it. I could almost hear Maggie's voice in my head. Syrupy, sweet, smug, certain she'd already won. Oh, bless your heart, Jake, you're fighting progress. Progress. That's what they call it when greed wears lipstick. But I wasn't done digging. Something in those old files didn't add up. Water flow patterns, creek maps, property boundaries. Then buried beneath a century of paperwork, I found it. A 1923 water rights deed, written in fountain pen and filed under my great-grandfather's name. That document gave my family senior water rights to the entire Willow Creek watershed. Older than the city, older than the county, older than any of those luxury homes Maggie was building on my back 40. They hadn't just stolen my land. They'd stolen my water, the lifeblood of every farm within 10 miles. When I walked out of that courthouse, the Texas sun hit different, hotter, meaner. It was like the land itself was waiting for me to do something about it. That night, I watched a local news clip. Maggie on camera, talking about dangerous dam structures and public safety concerns. She was crying crocodile tears for Channel 7, claiming my dam was unsafe for her beloved community. The same community she'd built by choking off a creek that had been flowing for generations. The next morning, I drove out to the dam. The water line was almost gone, and the air smelled like dry clay and betrayal. That's when I knew this wasn't going to be won in courtrooms. This was going to be won in the field, the same way Pops built it, with dirt, steel, and patience. She had her cameras. I had federal permits, water rights, and a dam older than her HOA's existence. Hit subscribe to Tomato Tales so you don't miss the moment gravity decides to fight back. You ever notice how bullies always smile right before they swing? That was Maggie Thornwell. One moment she's waving from her golf cart. The next, she's unleashing a suburban army in matching polo shirts. She called it a neighborhood safety patrol. 3 HOA board members who parked their SUVs at the edge of my driveway, snapping photos, writing down license plates, and whispering like they were tailing a fugitive. Every move I made, documented, reported, exaggerated. Then came the complaints, loud music while I ran my tractor. Unsightly structures, referring to a barn that had stood since 1962. Environmental hazards, because apparently, a working septic system now violated community aesthetics. It was textbook harassment, wrapped in pastel colors and polite smiles. When that didn't break me, they went lower. Maggie's husband, Rick, Mr. City Council, ordered a wellness check on me through veteran services. Apparently, I was a troubled vet showing erratic behavior. The social worker who showed up was kind, just doing her job. But seeing Maggie sitting in her golf cart across the road, pretending to prune flowers while watching, that's when it stopped being harassment. It became psychological warfare. And then came the bureaucratic blitz. One week I had the building inspector, the fire marshal, animal control, and the health department on my porch, all at once. Each one had a clipboard, each one had a fine, and every one of them somehow connected back to the Thornwells. Most folks would have packed up and left, but Pops didn't raise me that way. He used to say, "When they hit you with paperwork, son, drown 'em in proof." So I called my old Army buddy Tony Riggs, who now works for the EPA. 20 minutes on the phone with him taught me more about environmental law than any $85,000 lawyer could. If Maggie's crew diverted a natural creek without federal clearance, that was a Clean Water Act violation, a federal offense. That night, I started documenting everything. Trail cameras hidden in mesquite trees, time-stamped photos of every diverted trench, flow rate measurements from 3 points along the creek. If they wanted a fight, I'd give them one. But it would be the kind of fight they couldn't win with gossip or fines. I wasn't just defending land anymore. I was building a case. They thought they could bury me in paperwork, but soon they'd learn I was the one digging graves for their lies. Hit subscribe to Tomato Tales because the flood's coming, and it's bringing justice with it. By September, I'd memorized every inch of that creek like a battlefield map. The waterline was almost gone, replaced by cracked mud and tire tracks from Maggie's construction crews. Each night, I could hear the diesel engines running long past midnight, pouring concrete where water should have been. But the more they built, the deeper they buried themselves. Tony called back one evening with news that stopped me mid-sentence. "Jake," he said, "if they diverted a natural waterway without federal permits, that's a Clean Water Act violation. That's $50,000 per day." He didn't need to say more. I suddenly had leverage, so I doubled down, installed flow meters at every choke point, collected sediment samples, temperature readings, and rainfall logs. Every number told the same story. Willow Creek was being strangled. While I worked the science, Maggie worked the spin. She called an emergency HOA meeting and invited local reporters. On live TV, she stood in front of a picket fence backdrop, tears glistening under studio lights. "We're worried about our children's safety," she said, clutching a tissue. "That old dam could burst any day." The cameras loved her. The truth, not so much. If anyone had checked public records, they'd have seen the dam past its last inspection with perfect marks, certified by the Army Corps itself. But public sympathy's a tricky thing. Rumors spread faster than facts, and suddenly half the county thought I was some unstable veteran sitting on a bomb. Then, buried in another stack of records, I found the first real crack in their empire, a flood zone map. Their entire development sat in a federal 100-year floodplain. Insurance companies had refused to cover them until the HOA submitted a mitigation plan. Their solution? Divert Willow Creek away from their homes and straight onto my property. That wasn't just shady. It was insurance fraud, a federal crime. The more I uncovered, the clearer the picture became. Rick Thornwell wasn't just Maggie's husband. He was the lead investor in the construction company building those houses. Every lot sold, every permit signed. Money flowed right back into his pocket. And every shovelful of dirt stolen from my land was another deposit into their family bank account. I stared at the cracked reservoir that night, the dam lit by moonlight, and made a decision. If they wanted to play dirty, I'd play smart. No more lawyers. No more waiting. It was time to turn the tables, one piece of federal paperwork at a time. Maggie thought she'd dried up my creek, but she'd just opened a floodgate she couldn't control. By the time autumn rolled in, The air smelled like cedar dust and tension. Maggie's crews worked day and night, pouring concrete, installing fake creeks lined with decorative stones, the kind made to look natural for real estate photos, but useless for real water. Every new home was another nail in her coffin, and she didn't even know it yet. While she was building walls, I was building a case. I had photos, flow readings, and a week-by-week timeline showing how their diversion was draining the dam. But facts alone don't win wars. You need people who'll fight with you. That's when I met Amanda Cross, an environmental lawyer who didn't care about money, only justice. She specialized in pro bono water rights cases and had a reputation for making bureaucrats sweat. When I showed her my documentation, she looked at me like she'd found buried treasure. "Jake," she said, tapping the 1923 water rights deed. "This isn't just strong. This is a federal noose waiting for someone to step into it." Amanda brought allies with her, people Maggie had burned before. Miguel Santos, a local farmer whose family had lost irrigation when Willow Creek was rerouted. Mrs. Chen, whose garden had survived 4 generations until it dried up the moment the HOA poured their concrete channels, and a half-dozen other neighbors who'd stayed silent out of fear. One by one, they stepped forward. Turns out Maggie had done this before, in Houston. Different HOA, same playbook. She'd forced smaller landowners out, absorbed their property, and left town right before the EPA slapped that community with millions in fines. Now she'd reinvented herself in Austin. New town, same corruption. We met every night in my old barn, blueprints spread out across hay bales, legal documents pinned to wooden beams like war maps. Amanda strategized. Miguel collected water use data. Mrs. Chen handled local press outreach. Even the diner waitress down the road helped feed us and pass information. Every time Maggie sent another code violation notice, Amanda filed a counter with the county clerk. For every harassment complaint, we sent federal documentation to the EPA. Bit by bit, we turned their paper war against them. Then, one evening, Amanda found something explosive. A clause in the HOA's flood insurance application, claiming that all waterway changes had been approved by federal agencies. It was a blatant lie, and a federal felony. That's when we realized we weren't just fighting for land anymore. We were uncovering a full-blown criminal conspiracy. We had evidence, allies, and law on our side. But Maggie wasn't done fighting. Her next move wouldn't come through paperwork. It would come under the cover of night. The first real rain in months came with thunder that sounded like a warning. Out in the distance, lightning flashed over the half-finished homes of Willowbrook Estates, illuminating steel beams and unfinished rooftops like a skeleton army waiting to march. By then, Maggie had realized something was wrong. The city wasn't answering her calls as quickly. Inspectors had gone quiet. Rumors of federal attention were spreading, and fear was creeping into her perfectly curated smile. That's when she switched tactics, from harassment to sabotage. It started small. One morning, my trail cameras caught 2 men cutting through the brush near the dam. They wore reflective vests with the HOA logo, but their truck had no plates. Later that night, I found fresh concrete jammed into the spillway's hydraulic lines, a deliberate attempt to disable the gate controls. If the next storm hit with that blockage in place, the dam could have failed catastrophically. I spent hours breaking out the concrete by hand, the air thick with the smell of wet clay and machine oil. Every swing of the hammer echoed across the empty valley like thunder. I was tired, furious, but more determined than ever. When I showed the evidence to Amanda and Tony, they both went pale. "This isn't vandalism," Tony said. "This is attempted environmental sabotage, federal crime." That night, Tony called in a quiet favor, a contact inside the sheriff's department. Deputy Rodriguez agreed to keep watch. Sure enough, at 2 in the morning, he caught one of Maggie's security contractors creeping near the dam with a bag of quickset cement. The arrest was clean, quick, and humiliating. By sunrise, Maggie's PR machine was already spinning. She went on the local morning show, crocodile tears in her eyes, claiming, "This veteran learned to use water as a weapon overseas. Now he's threatening families here at home." She even brought Rick on as her expert witness, waving falsified documents and talking about public safety risks, but her words couldn't stop the weather. The forecast called for record rainfall, the kind that would test every inch of her illegal construction. And I knew what she didn't. The dam was still operational. Every bolt, every gate, every gauge, ready. Pops built it to protect the valley, not destroy it. And that's exactly what it was about to do again. As the first raindrops hit the tin roof of my porch, I checked my instruments one last time. Water levels were rising. Pressure was building. Maggie had built downstream, and the creek was remembering where it belonged. When the storm hit, they'd call it an act of God. But I knew better. It was an act of engineering. The storm didn't arrive. It descended. Sheets of rain hammered the valley, drowning out the sound of everything but wind and water. Thunder rolled over Willow Brook like cannon fire, shaking windows and splitting trees in half. From my porch, I could see the lightning reflecting off the surface of the dam. The water was rising fast, faster than I'd ever seen. Every gauge screamed red. Every alarm light flickered through the rain. But it wasn't panic I felt. It was clarity. The reservoir was doing exactly what Pops designed it to do. Absorb, redirect, protect. For 45 years, that dam had shielded this valley from floods. And tonight it was about to prove its worth again, downstream. Maggie's subdivision glowed with porch lights and half-built roofs, homes she swore were flood-safe. But she hadn't accounted for nature, or for the truth she tried to bury under cement and signatures. As the rainfall peaked, the spillway gates triggered automatically. I could hear the deep mechanical groan of steel shifting against water pressure, the sound of balance being restored. The floodgates opened, and a controlled surge poured into the diverted trenches Maggie had carved through my land. Those channels were supposed to save her development. Instead, they directed the flood straight through the heart of Willowbrook Estates. Within minutes, retention ponds overflowed. Construction sites turned to rivers. The brand new tennis courts she'd bragged about on the news were under 4 feet of muddy water. It wasn't destruction, it was revelation. The water wasn't punishing anyone. It was simply going home. At sunrise, the storm broke. The valley steamed under soft golden light. From my porch, I could see debris caught in fences, plastic signs reading luxury living, coming soon. The irony didn't escape me. Maggie's house, built on the highest lot, had survived. Barely. But her empire hadn't. Every inspector, every news crew, every drone operator in the county was now documenting the damage. And when they traced the flood pattern, it led straight to the illegal diversions her HOA created. Her own paperwork condemned her. Her lies washed away by the creek she tried to strangle. When Amanda and I arrived on site later that morning, the sheriff was already there. The same one who'd dropped my eviction notice months before. He handed me a copy of a new document, still damp from the rain. "Federal injunction," he said. "EPA's taking over jurisdiction. Effective immediately." I looked past him toward the dam where water was still spilling in slow, steady rhythm. Pops's engineering had held strong. The land had protected itself, and it had taken the truth with it. The flood ended Maggie's empire, but her story didn't sink quietly, because when the water receded, it exposed something buried even deeper. The morning after the storm, the valley smelled like wet cedar and truth. Silence hung heavy. Not the peaceful kind, but the kind that follows after something's broken beyond repair. I walked the length of the creek, boots sinking into the soaked earth. Where Maggie's diversion channels once cut through, the flood had carved them deeper, exposing pipes, cables, and concrete foundations ripped open like pages of a book. Nature had done what no courtroom could. It unearthed the evidence. By noon, the site was crawling with investigators, EPA trucks, county engineers, two men in dark suits who didn't introduce themselves but asked all the right questions. Amanda and Tony were there, standing by the spillway with clipboards in hand, watching as drones scanned the damage. Turns out, Maggie's mitigation plan wasn't just illegal. It was fraudulent down to the signatures. Half the permits had been forged using Rick Thornwell's city credentials. They'd even falsified environmental compliance data, numbers copied straight from other projects and pasted into official reports. The evidence was everywhere, literally written into the land. The flood had exposed buried chemical drums from old construction sites, dumped illegally decades ago to cut costs. When the cameras caught those drums floating through Willowbrook's designer cul-de-sacs, it was over. Within 48 hours, the story hit every local station. By day 3, it made national news. Joy scandal uncovered. Councilman and developer face federal investigation. Rick was arrested first, booked for fraud, falsifying documents and misuse of city funds. Maggie tried to play the victim again, crying on camera about environmental sabotage. But public opinion had turned. Those same reporters she once courted were now replaying clips of her old interviews side by side, with EPA footage of toxic runoff and damaged wildlife habitats. Her crocodile tears had dried up for good. Amanda pushed the case forward, filing a joint lawsuit on behalf of every landowner Maggie had ever wronged. Federal agencies froze the HOA's accounts, halted construction, and ordered a full cleanup of Willow Creek under EPA supervision. One night, I sat out by the dam, the same spot where Pops used to drink coffee and hum old country songs. The reservoir shimmered under the moon, calm again. It felt like the land itself was finally exhaling. Pops used to say, "The truth don't drown, son. It just waits for the water to clear." Now I knew what he meant. Every lie they buried had floated to the surface. Every false permit, every dollar stolen, every piece of greed dressed as progress. And as the valley healed, so did I. The truth surfaces, there's always one last ripple. Because justice isn't just about payback. It's about legacy. The storm had passed, but its memory lingered in every corner of the valley. Grass began pushing through the silt. The air smelled of wet soil and rebirth. And for the first time in years, Willow Creek flowed the way it was meant to. Not redirected, not restrained, just alive. Federal crews came and went over the next few months, assessing, cleaning, restoring. They rebuilt what was necessary and removed what never should have been there. Every illegal pipe, every forged culvert, every scar Maggie's ambition had left behind, erased one by one. Rick took a plea deal to avoid federal prison. Maggie wasn't so lucky. Turns out falsifying permits across state lines earns you more than just fines. The last I heard, she was facing multiple counts of fraud, conspiracy, and environmental tampering. Funny thing is, the same reporters she once called for interviews now waited outside the courthouse just to get a photo of her in handcuffs. Amanda kept fighting, not just for me, but for every family along Willow Creek. The EPA reclassified the dam as a protected historic infrastructure site, honoring Pops's original design. They even installed a plaque near the spillway, in memory of Samuel Morrison, whose hands shaped the water that shaped this valley. I stood there the day it was unveiled. Wind moved through the mesquite trees. The water shimmered gold under the setting sun, and for the first time since coming home I felt something I hadn't in years. Peace. The old farmhouse got fixed up too. The roof no longer leaked. The porch swing creaked again. And the dam's hum at night became my favorite sound in the world. Sometimes kids from the local school come out for field trips. Their teachers tell them about the man who saved the valley. I just smile and tell them the truth. It wasn't me. It was the land doing what it was always meant to do. Because this story was never about revenge. It was about balance, the kind that can't be bought, bullied, or buried under concrete. The kind my grandfather believed in when he dug that first trench by hand. All I did was remind the world that gravity doesn't take sides. It just obeys the truth. And as the sun set over Willow Creek, I realized something. Pops didn't just build a dam. He built a lesson. One that'll outlast every HOA, every politician, every lie dressed up as progress. Because some legacies aren't written in history books. They're carved in earth, sealed in water, and carried forward by those who refuse to let them drown. You've been watching Tomato Tales, where stories flow deeper than they seem.